Greetings to all the people who are watching this podcast with us. So today we have a very, very special guest, and Mr. Rajiv Williams we have been very fortunate to get his appointment for this podcast. And today, the reason I'm very, very excited for this podcast is because when our team approached Mr. Rajiv, he already knew about our organization somehow. He had listened about us a few years back. So I think that was very, very special to me personally. Now, sir, before we get started, there's a quick 30-second introduction, 30-second superhero introduction that we follow. So first, I'll introduce that, and then you can start. So, hi everyone, my name is Shrey Saxena. My organization is Grow Diesel Climate Care Council. At Grow Diesel, we are fighting climate change by converting waste into biofuel. Till date, we have eliminated more than 250,000 metric tons of waste, and we have generated more than 20 million kgs of biofuel. So this is what we are doing in our organization. Over to you, sir. Your 30-second superhero introduction.
Thank you, Shrey, and it's a pleasure to actually interact with you today. Especially Grow Diesel, because Grow Diesel was one of our initial partners in 2007-8, and it's been some journey. And I joined Jindal's also for about 17 years, having just exited out at the end of last month. It's a pleasure to interact with the younger generation, younger crowd, and younger people to talk about corporate social responsibility and all areas and activities, including, of course, climate change issues and whatever issues come your way, including waste management. So I'll pause here. Thank you.
Amazing, sir. Welcome to the Impact Podcast. So I would like to ask you the first question, and that is more related to your personal life. And that is, what is that one crazy story from your school or college time that you are super proud of? Something that you are really proud of that you did in school or your college?
I think everything in school I should be proud of. It's not just one story. There's so many stories, whether we went to school at the primary level, secondary, or of course, higher education. But the point here is that what the impact of the teachers have left on your mind, the imprint that you have. And just recently, there was an article that was floated by one of our English professors and English teachers at school, and how beautifully they have taught us. And so many activities that younger students of the school of La Martiniere College is where I grew up and I studied. And I was in the hostel all through. So the hostel areas of activity are so different to a day scholar attending. And there is, of course, a holistic development. But the one key area that you asked me, which really motivated me, was that we, as a community of different faiths and different castes and creeds and of economic backgrounds, never ever thought in those lines what I feel today, what is happening in schools and colleges. We were all in unified approach of development, and we did not bother as to who is a richer lot and who is not such a richer lot, or who is got some color that he prefers to wear as compared to the other color. So it was a blend, and that's the strength, I think, of our nation state, that today we must respect each other. And that's the key takeaway from me, from a school which I left over 50 years ago. So that's the joy of being part of the system. And today I can share that in whatever format that you want.
And I think, sir, that is a very, very amazing thing that you mentioned. I would really like to highlight that particular aspect, and that is the unified approach. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you carefully noticed, so sir talked about the belongingness of a community. So during that time, there was no differentiation based on caste, creed, or the economic backgrounds. Rather, there was a unified approach. So I feel that is very, very important when we talk about collective growth. So thank you so much for mentioning and highlighting that particular point, sir. Which brings me to the next question. What motivated you to do what you're doing right now?
Well, I think, I mentioned to you just 17 years of my journey as far as the corporate social responsibility is concerned. But what I haven't spoken about is having left the school, I joined the army. Straight into battle of 1971, walking as a 20-year-old, going into war, in combat, in real war, which people for the last 52 years have not seen a total war. So I was in the army for 33 years before I left. And then I joined Jindal's a year later, and a 17 years lot over there. So what really inspired me is your question. I think people Now, when you are in the army, the approach was what? As an officer, as a young officer to a senior officer, the basic thing were your troops. Troops are your people. And if you are deployed in a particular area, you are deployed for the people of that particular area, besides, of course, the sacrosanct responsibility that you've got of protection of the borders and of the line of control, etc. But what is important is the people. And then when I left the army, and we did lovely projects, great projects, as part of the Operation Sadbhavna in Jammu and Kashmir, especially in the area of Ladakh, where we modeled soon after the Kargil War as to how we can take care of the people where you are deployed. And that's a key takeaway, which I thought was part of the Army's social responsibility. And when it was part of the Army's social responsibility, and I graduated, having taken premature retirement from the Army and moved on to the civil sector, and I joined a large corporate like Jindal, which had occupied land of communities in remote areas where the plant was being set up, where you are using the water which was for the communities. Then came the point of corporate social responsibility. It's the people that you are impacting by your operations need to be taken care of. And that's a buzzword which started good about 15, 17 years ago. From the back room, it came to the boardroom. Today, it's in the boardroom. And the rationale was that it is the first P of the triple bottom line of corporate social responsibility: people, planet, and profit. These are 3 Ps of corporate social responsibility. But the first P is what? People.
People.
If you take care of the people, you get the license to operate. And the same thing I thought in the military parlance, what we actually were doing is for the people. If the people were with you, you got information much earlier. Your operational ability was much higher. Kargil would not have happened if there was no chasm between the people and the military. That's the lesson which people must realize. It's part of our responsibility. And the same thing happened in corporates. If you don't take care of the people around you, they will not let you operate. If they don't let you operate, a one-day lockout in a plant means billions of dollars gone. That's the economic value of taking care of communities and taking care of, through this process of corporate social responsibility. And I suppose you'll have a question, which are the areas which we get engaged. So I'll wait for that question, and then I'll tell you how we, from Jindal Stainless Limited, worked on various projects by carrying out our baseline surveys. Once you know what the needs of the communities are, then you start the projects. Correct. It's not right for us to think what I perceive as the need of the community. If I think that this is the need of the community, you may go wrong. You will go wrong, not to forget the may part. But if you are aware of the fact what the community needs, the bottom-up approach, generally you will hit the nail on the head and be correct. I'll pause.
Indeed, sir. And I think that was such a detailed answer, and I was completely immersed in all the stories that you shared. So you told that you have been in army for almost 33 years. So first of all, thank you for your service and everything that you did for our nation. And I really loved the analogy of the 3 Ps that you were talking about: people, planet, and profits, and how that even in army, you were working for people. And then when you transitioned from an army personnel to a corporate person, it was still about the people. So I really loved the fact that how you have made people the center of everything and how they motivate you to do things. Just a follow-up question from your story. How the transition happened from an army personnel to a corporate person? Like, what was that turning point when you decided to leave the army and join the corporate?
Well, this question has been asked a number of times. Not only a question of why, but how do you feel having exited from the army and come into the corporate world? Well, as I told you, that in my army career, when I was at the peak and height of my professionalism, I realized that there are issues which needs to be mended, and there were personal requirements for me to move out. To move out where? I had, of course, maybe the postgraduate degrees and the degrees that are required, etc., etc. But that was not the motivating factor. I think at that level of service, you've got adequate experience which you can share. And sharing was one, of course, being reasonably okay in communications piece, having taken care of the complete Kargil war as far as communication was concerned. We were handling the media and actually seeing that you guys, of course, you were still very young, but the people of India could see the war right in their bedrooms. And that was the important part when we first used the third tool of media, bringing your wars to your bedrooms and making you realize and get that appeal and that motivation from the community at large. And then I realized that, it's something which I mentioned to you. How can you change lives of people? By contributions,
right.
By contributions through your expertise, by contributions through financials, and also, most importantly, aligning the people around you towards the objective of inclusivity. And that's what I think motivated me to take on this particular area where very few were indulging into corporate social responsibility. And it was a blessing in disguise as to how Jindals picked me up. I had no clue, no idea, and no qualifications or tests of the XISS, etc.
Mm-hmm.
But that's something different at our level. Education format, typically on a particular framework, may not be required when you are moving from the heart, wanting to reach out to people for the benefit of the community, for the benefit of your own industry, for the benefit of the national goals and the national aims of inclusive growth, which is important. So that's what motivated me to join corporate social responsibility. And then, of course, in that space of time, besides having started CSR with Jindal Stainless Limited group of companies from a scratch, I realized, of course, there was lots of learnings to be picked up, lots of friends who taught me, there's lots of things which were available on the net, there's lots of interaction with communities, interaction with the higher-ups in terms of government officials, and of course, we launched a number of programs. That was a learning when I took a key away, and I feel very confident and very passionate about it. Passion is not something which is easy when you're talking of lives, of communities, of people. More to do with spend part, which people start initially thinking, kitna kharcha kar rahe ho tum corporate social responsibility? Now, what are the outcomes and takeoffs? You can't expect that to happen overnight. It's only once we realize that this was the gap which was existing and talked from the top to bottom to get the buy-in from the top, then there's nothing which is stopping you. And at our level, we could talk right to Mr. Jindal, Mrs. Jindal, and then, of course, we could carry out our projects in a most, I think, professional way. And had lovely teams which I had recruited or enrolled at different locations, different geographies across the country.
Mm-hmm.
And the opportunities I got to travel all over the world to try and showcase different thematic areas in different geographies, being invited by the United Nations themselves to speak on the business and human rights platform, to speak on women empowerment, to speak on certain issues which are typical to Indian society and not to the Western world. And that's the interesting journey that I thought I could speak at those forums across the world, and therefore can stand today and talk about corporate social responsibility, of the impact that's required to be made through various formats, through various programs. And I thought that kind of a journey was very blissful and joyful for us to really celebrate the day-to-day when we are graduating from CSR and ESG. The ESG framework has come, sustainability, all these are jargons which are coming up. But the bottom of the thing is your people. It's your connect between head and heart, speaking the language of the heart. You don't have to know the language of the people, but when you speak that language, they understand you. And when I go to Orissa, when I talk to the people, I realize they don't understand a thing about Hindi or about English to forget about, but Odia, and that to the typical Odia, Tet Odia in the remote areas. But there was never a communication gap because they knew what I was saying and I could understand what they wanted in return. Thank you.
Amazing, sir. And I think that was such a phenomenal roller coaster of your experiences. And I'm really impressed that how you always keep inclusive growth as the fundamental core of everything that you are mentioning. So even in the previous answers, you're very much focused about the inclusive growth. So I think that is very fascinating to learn from your experience. First by being in the army, then coming to the corporate, and then starting the CSR from the scratch and being in the building years of the CSR, then going to the big platforms to share your ideas. So I feel that your immense experience that you bring to the table is very, very motivating and inspiring for youngsters like me. Which brings me to the next question, sir. What is the biggest problem that you have solved and how did you do that? It could be a project related, it could be related to your career in your army, or maybe some of your personal problem that you would like to share.
Well, a problem if you start analyzing and thinking that it's unsurmountable, then you don't start. But when you realize that a problem is not a problem, but an exciting journey of your growth, personal growth, then you find solutions accordingly. Starting from the army itself, I mean, being a young officer, moving straight into battle, Indo-Pakistan War of 1971. As a young second lieutenant, when the mother realized that this young lad is going straight to war, may not come back. And that's the feeling, the strength that I thought, which I could see in my mother at that stage of saying, you're going to war, go, do your bit. And then gradually when you are starting in your career graph, there were many challenges that you faced. Many challenges in terms of staying away from home, from family, being from the infantry, and being from the Jammu and Kashmir Light Infantry, 8th Battalion, 8 Jackalai, which we had the opportunity of going to Siachen and capturing the world's highest post. You can see the picture at the back.
Yes, I noticed that.
The highest post in the world, which my battalion captured. And 3 months later, Pakistanis attacked on us with all rigor and assault. That time, Musharraf was a brigadier. And he, with his special troops, launched the attack for 3 days, 3 nights. Temperatures minus 45 degrees. When the wind chill factor was touching very low and high. For us to survive and stay at altitudes of 22,000 feet without oxygen, which people realize were the very challenging moments. But it was the strength, not only physical, but the psychological strength, which is critical mass for growth and development of a young officer to a soldier. And in combat, you don't feel the pain when you are already trained to carry out such kind of tasks. Now, when that happens and you come out with the civil circuit and moved on in life from the military to the civil career, you find that challenges or the difficulties or problems are always have a solution. And when I joined itself, I realized the problem was probably more within than outside. Well, fortunately, I joined at a level of senior position whereby I could directly connect with the chairman and the managing director and the head of the foundation, that is Mrs. Jindal herself, who was so very articulate and very understanding of how to approach this problem. This problem of the spend part of it, that kharcha ho raha hai. I said, it's not a spend, it's an investment. It's an investment on a community which will give you the returns in due course of time, not in a year or 2 years or 3 years, but 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 50 years. And it's the change from the charity piece which everybody is used to, of philanthropy piece which people talk about, of welfare. That's something which obviously feel that it is my right to do a welfare for your employees. But welfare for the community at large, or giving a check that you can construct a school or construct a hospital. That's it. There's no connect. That's where corporate social responsibility change came into being. There has to be connect with the community, that tomorrow, when he comes back, he doesn't say that, do I know you?
Mhm.
If you give a check or paisa de diya aapne usko, he will say, thank you very much. He will have your picture over there and photograph session and everything else will happen. But 3 months down the line, he'll forget. He needs more and more. He needs to be more dependent on you. Unless there is a community connect between the corporate and the people, this want, this desire, this dependency will continue with the corporates, and that's the problem which charity, welfare, philanthropy faced. And this new coined word of corporate social responsibility came into being, because if you have read that book of C.K. Prahlad, Bottom of the Pyramid, the mass is bottom of the pyramid. Your markets are at the bottom of the pyramid, especially a country like India, where your products have to be sold right to the bottom of the pyramid. It's not that they don't want to live well. They also want to live well. They also want to look good. They also want to use your products. They want to respect you. But to command that respect, you got to understand that your reach has to be far more with whatever investment that you can do with the community, so that you can carry on your business sustainably, and not that it is closed down after 5 years, 10 years. And just to give you a key point here, in the last century, 100 years ago, out of the top 100 companies, only 5 remain today.
Oh, wow.
Others have disappeared. They have just disappeared. And proud to say that Tata's was one of them in India, which carries on to sustain. I'm sure Jindal will also sustain when you're talking about 100 years down the line, because your heart has to be the right place of serving. And service before self should be the mantra of the young people who are going to be coming into this form. Whether you coin corporate social responsibility domain, the sustained social development, or you're developing markets, or you're doing finance, or you're doing project planning and project management, whatever field that you go to, remember, it's people that you'll be serving. It's the people who will be giving you the money. It's the people who will sustain you and keep you well.
Amazing, sir. I mean, I could really feel the intensity and the depth of the words that you shared, and combining all your experiences and beautifully formulating a beautiful message for youngsters like us. I think speaks volumes about you as a person and your service. Beautiful, sir. I'm really, really amazed by all the stories that you shared. Coming to the next section of this podcast, and that is the CSR section. So in this section, we'll revolve most of the questions specifically around CSR. So coming to the first question of this section, how has the CSR landscape changed post-COVID era? If you have to compare pre-COVID CSR versus post-COVID CSR, how have things changed?
Important question, and a lot of questions like this have been asked before too. What is the change in CSR, COVID and post-COVID? For obvious reasons that you realize that during the COVID piece, physical connect was replaced by remote connect, where schools or education platforms had teachings being done online. That physical connect was creating a problem, because when they started offline classes again, the complete approach was different. Complete approach of even sharing and learning and being more serious, giving more time of mutual understanding and mutual respect had to be revived. Children had never gone to school before. For 2 years, there were no schools. So the young children who were moving from nursery to KG, etc., suddenly found this huge change in 2 years' time when they went to class 1 straight away. So that kind of a change had to be adapted to find a solution. So firstly, there was a change of online, the teachers, I'm talking about education now. And there was offline after 2 years, again, a complete change of how to manage the children, manage the parents of the children, because parents were so busy in their respective online work, targets, etc., meetings, etc., that there was a bit of a neglect as far as the children were concerned. And without kind of support system in place with many, resulted in what? Domestic violence. Domestic violence was a very major challenge during the COVID period. I've got statistics. I started a project on mitigating this problem of domestic violence during the COVID piece. And that has resulted to a lot of social issues. How many people who were, let's take from the disability sector or a special ability sector, how many corporates are doing kind of projects for them? What happened to their lives? Whether it was physically challenged people or whether they were mentally challenged or, for that matter, hearing impaired, visually impaired, etc. Very few corporates got involved with it. That was a change that was required to be actually incorporated, whether it's education or whether it was skills. Now, skill development, if you did not package your skills program properly, whether it was at the Government of India level or Ministry of Skills, or at the corporate level where you're having skill development programs, or whether it be the skill training institutes of the ITI's equivalent, they have to be tweaked. And you've got to make them job ready, jobs which are going to be different post-COVID. With the migration that you saw from Delhi, Mumbai, Ahmedabad, and bigger towns of Kolkata, etc., they went back to the villages. They went back empty-handed. They had the skill sets for the urban area. They did not have or forgot the skill sets required for the rural opportunities, farming, agriculture. There's so many opportunities that are there. And therefore, it was important to change and switch the skill sets for the opportunities that are existing for the rural setup. Whether it's to do with waste management or whether it was to do with water, or whether it was to do with education per se, or to do with development entirely, or even your communications. All that needed a change. And you had to, of course, be adapted to this new phenomena of climate change. Now, climate change resulted in what? Different cropping systems. It changed the entire landscape of usage of water. What new techniques are required to grow rice, for example, where you have less water consumption and because of the availability, where the water was touching about 100 feet below, today it's gone down to 300 feet. I mean, you've got areas in the NCR itself, National Capital Region, where Gurgaon has faces tremendous problems with water, where despite the rivers being close by, you don't have drinking water. So you have to adopt to that particular change and provide that kind of solution. And yesterday's paper said that there's going to be a ban on ROs. That's something which is going to be a change because of the wastage of water.
Right.
So we need technologies. So science and technology, CST is doing a lot of work around it. Or whether it is to do with the Department of Science and Technology is doing, but the technology is available abroad. They're expensive. Corporates have to invest into that. Not spend, invest into such kind of techniques and see how best you can manage. So these are the changes that have come about. Your plants are having industrial oxygen. Let's take, in our case, manufacturing sector, where you're manufacturing stainless steel. You've got huge facilities available. You're producing oxygen, industrial oxygen. But those plants suddenly had to be converted into your hydrogenated oxygen and moving those cylinders by air, by ship, by whatever means of road transport to places far away in the northern regions of Delhi, NCR, or Rajasthan, because oxygen was the key area during that COVID period. As a result of which you had to change and tweak that. Your paint factories, in our case, had to again start making things like your required for disinfectants. It is required for your other requirements of at that point in time. So adaptable to solutions to find ways and means of overcoming, whether it was to do with synthetics or whether it's to do with hardcore stainless steel or whether it's to do with climate change strategies. And now, of course, the pressure of mitigating the carbon dioxide emissions by various processes. So there's lots to talk about. And I can keep talking about this fact of how COVID and post-COVID has made a big change. But change is in the implementation piece, in the understanding of how to carry out your responsibility, which is the same project, same areas of activities, but being done in a different way. Thank you.
Talking about the projects that as an organization, Jindal support under CSR, what are those specific kind of projects that your organization was supporting or is supporting?
Well, as I mentioned to you right at the beginning, Shrey, that the start point happens to be, of course, the carrying out the baseline survey. Once you've done the baseline survey, you realize it's different from a manufacturing industry as compared to a service industry. Now, service industry, I will just share with you, has got a very cool kind of facility of saying that, okay, we are into health. We'll only do health projects across the country, pan-India, no worries. Or if I'm IT industry, then I will do only IT, skill development, or school or education, IT front across the country. Or if I'm doing with mobile technology, then my telephones are being used in the southernmost tip of India and the northernmost part of the country. I can do very simple education project. Just one project. I invest whatever I do, corporate social responsibility. Now it's 2% of your profits invested into one particular area only of education, let's say, or health. It's different from a manufacturing and an extractive industry. Why? Because you are responsible for their education. You are responsible for their skill sets, to make sure that they get employment in your own companies. There's also employment in other companies around there on skills which they never had before, of working in such kind of processing systems. You need a high-end skill. You need to be a skilled person to be employed.
Right.
And therefore, what resulted in is you getting your manpower from those skilled states, which provide that skilled manpower, and you bring them all over, right to, let's take remote part of Orissa. And then there is this problem which takes place of migration. How do you address the cultures of the north and the south, or north or the west or south, and some other part of the country? You've got to blend them. And that leads to what? Animosity of the locals, that they're not being employed. So you've got to face those challenges and find solutions of how you can skill them, that they can be absorbed. The second thing is suddenly you realize that the water that is one river is feeding 10 large corporates. Let's take an our case in Kalinganagar. All the big names are there of steel manufacturing, of power. But there's one river, one water source. How do you recharge that water? How do you make sure that your pipelines that are going from one place to another are also making sure that there is adequate water harvesting, that you have the water facilities? You're using that energy which is required by 10 large plants, which was not really their requirement earlier. How you're using alternative sources of energy, of let's take solar or wind, or be with some other alternative sources, depending where you're located. How best you can mitigate that problem of using the alternative sources of energy. And when you're talking today's context of climate change and COP27 and 28 and 29, when you're talking of 2050 is my net zero target. If it's a net zero target, you've got to work today. If it is a net zero by 2070 for the country, you've got to make sure that you reach your target by 2030, 2040, 2050, and 70. And that's something which corporates in the manufacturing sector have to realize and plan a number of projects. I'm just trying to tell you, that's the difference. There are a number of projects from education to healthcare to women empowerment, livelihood generation, to business and human rights, or infrastructure development, or be it climate change or health, everything has to be done. So your investment of X amount has to be divided into a number of projects. And you do not have that liberty of saying, we only do education, forget the others. If you plan to do that as a corporate who is into manufacturing space, beware. Beware, because there will be an educated lot, but there will be no livelihood generation for the family. There will be educated lot, their demands will increase. You will have to bear with those kind of wherewithals to make sure that you got your capacities to resolve those issues.
Right. So, sir, let's say that once you have identified the particular project, now what all do you look for in an NGO partner or an organization before shortlisting it? So let's say that you have identified the geography, you have identified a particular project. Now you have to shortlist an NGO partner, a non-profit partner, to execute that. So what are all those parameters that need to be checked before you finalize them?
Right. The first thing, of course, is due diligence of the partner organization, whether it is a civil society organization, a non-profit organization, or non-governmental organization, or a corporate itself, which has got the expertise of handling this particular area. Now, how do you choose? How do you move this forward? That's the challenge that we face, all corporates face. And yesterday I was in a conversation with I'm also advising now on a couple of issues on this issue to some big corporates or big organizations. This question was posed again yesterday. That's the usual format. You see, there is the top 100, top 200, top 500 NGO partners. You find the websites of the Ministry of Corporate Affairs or Institute of Corporate Affairs, or you have in the Global Compact Network, or you've got the listings in the Credibility Alliance, etc., etc. Good thing. So you've got the top 100, top 50, whom you feel are already available to you. But that's one part. The second part is most of these corporates or most of these NGOs who are in the top list have got sub-partners, have got collaborations at the grassroots level as to how they are going to be implementing it. And they carry out due diligence of these partner NGOs, and things work out also. But where we miss out is there are a large number of smaller NGOs who've got brilliant capacities of finding solutions at the grassroots level, which corporates must understand. And you will not get to know unless you hear from the word of the mouth. So somebody who is partnered with such organizations, and there are these organizations which can be clubbed under health, under women empowerment or livelihood generation, or under education, tap them, give them an opportunity. But you must do your own due diligence. This is not only the top 500 due diligence that you think that you've already done with because it's already on the websites. You have to go beyond that. And the implementing partners must realize that they are being monitored and will be evaluated. So the first thing is to, of course, carry out a due diligence through various processes that you have in place. The second thing is the personal visits to the project sites of your prospective partners. Whether they are actually on the ground being able to deliver. It's not only the black and white and the color that you see on the reports that are presented to you, or the lovely presentations that are made to you that you buy in. You've got to deep dive and see for yourselves whether this, whatever is listed, whatever is formatted in the annual reports, is there on the ground. That's why due diligence is the most important part before you select a partner. And he should have the expertise. Correct. He should have the expertise of doing that kind of work.
Correct. Absolutely, sir. And I think that is one very important aspect that you mentioned, because a lot of times where NGOs, even I've been seeing things closely, a lot of times where the NGOs fail is in their paperwork. Because corporates, they have to present everything to their board, to their shareholders, and everything needs to be perfectly presented on the paper. And a lot of times NGO partners, they fail to do that, to put exactly on paper as per the needs of the corporate. Secondly, which brings me to the second last question of this podcast, and that is, what is the funding size of the projects that you particularly support in your organization?
See, now one of the percentages from the kitty I have, I spend 10% in education, 5% in some other project, and 3% in some other project. Total is 100%. Because I've got 7, 8 projects at hand. That's one part of the percentage of the pie that is being invested in corporate social responsibilities. The how much piece, it depends. It's not just at 2%. For larger corporates, let me assure you, Shrey, whether we were under red for many years, Jindal Stainless Limited was having a very tough time, like many steel industries, where profit margins were absolutely zilch. Yet corporate social responsibilities did not stop because it is in the DNA of the corporates to invest into communities despite the fact whether the profits were forthcoming or not. And therefore, now you've got, of course, that Companies Act 2013 implemented in 14 onwards. And there are big strictures which are around it. Is that 2% investment? Not spent, 2% of profits. And 2% for larger companies is quite a bit.
Right.
But I know that for certain that companies like Tata's, companies like Jindal are spending much more than 2%. The cap is a minimum, but where the gap is existing is in the many other corporates, some large, but mostly smaller, the medium and the small scale industries. They don't know how to spend that money. And therefore, they have a system of whether you donate it through PM Cares or you donate it through a project like Swachh Abhiyan program or Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan program or some other government-sponsored program, you are clean. I have invested by 2% or 1.5% or 3%, but I have not got any connect with the community. That is not CSR. My wish and my message to the younger generation is, please make sure that the money spent is used for the purpose it was meant for. That can only happen if you do it directly or through your partner organizations, supporting the government organizations, instead of just investing a lot into government programs exclusively and washing your hands off because you've done your responsibility. There has to be a beyond business responsibility. There has to be a beyond control and mandatory requirements responsibility for you to fulfill. Compliance is one piece, but beyond compliance is what you got to think about. That's the only way that you can make a social change in times to come. Because let me tell you honestly, Shrey, our investment in corporates on social sector is minuscule. We might talk about that 1,000 crores or 1,700 crores have been spent on last 3 years or 5 years. Compared to the lakhs of crores of rupees which 17 odd ministries of the government of India are spending. Why was there a need for a Companies Act on CSR to have come forward? Because the quality is important rather than quantity. And I always challenge this aspect that many times in a conference and on many things, when we talk, we've touched billion lives of people. I said, wonderful. I have touched only hundreds of lives. But let me tell you, those 100 few, more than hundreds or multiples of 100, the quality of those achievers is much beyond the quantity which you claim to have actually achieved. And that's why, despite our budgets being low, we were invited almost everywhere, both in India and abroad. And that's the story that I think I should leave you with, is please make sure that your investment is done in a manner which is adequate monitoring and evaluation is carried out, and your impact assessment after the thing is done is projected, and it should be absolutely transparent. Let people know.
Correct.
And transparency and accountability are the driving forces of social change.
Amazing, sir. And I think that's a beautiful conclusion that you gave for all the people who will be watching this. And indeed, it has been a phenomenal journey, a roller coaster journey, if I specifically talk about this podcast, from knowing about your experience as a young early 20 person who went for a war to serving in army for 33 years and then to finally joining the corporate and making people the fundamental of everything and talking about inclusive growth. I feel you have indeed lived a beautiful life where you have created a massive impact with the help of your organization and your team. And with the rich experience that you bring to the table, I feel all the people who will be watching this podcast will get to learn a lot many things just like I did. With this, I would like to conclude this podcast. And once again, thank you for joining this podcast and tuning in with Grow Diesel. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. All the best to you. Bye-bye.